All right. Sorry about that. A few seconds late. Yeah, good to see you all here. Hope you're got good stuff going on. Those of you in the U.S., we're going to have Columbus Day tomorrow, or Indigenous Peoples Day, depending on where you're at. I'm actually going to have tomorrow someone on the show talking, actually historian on Columbus, talking about some of the real history about Columbus, because for those of you who have been grown up being educated in the modern school system, a lot of what you're taught about Columbus is not real history on Columbus. A lot of it comes from Howard Zinn, who wrote The People's History of the United States, and really is not an accurate portrayal of American history. Even during his time, a lot of people criticized him for spreading, false history. We'll have a great interview tomorrow with a historian on Columbus, so be sure to tune in tomorrow. Also, this coming week, I'm going to have some good stuff lined up, including James O'Keefe from Project Veritas, talking about him planning to launch a lawsuit possibly against New York Times. So tune in for that as well. I'll be keeping you updated. Now, that said, hey, everyone, good to see you. All right, so that said, let's jump into the the topics for today. Oh, yeah, you saw my haircut. I went and visited my dad for the weekend, actually, and my stepmom is a hairdresser, so she gave me a haircut. All right, folks, let's jump into the questions now. So first off, from a few from last week, just so you know, too, I have the chat below my camera today, camera above the computer. So you see me looking down, it's because I'm reading your chats. And you see me looking to the right, I have some notes on questions you guys are sending in, just so you know. All right, folks, let's jump into it now. So first off, last week, a couple from last week, if you folks have new questions, send them in. We'll try to get to them. This is from JJ Hikes. Hi, I'm just wondering if you have a podcast or similar. YouTube doesn't work so well when I want to listen to Crossroads while doing chores. It tends to stop if the screen sleeps. So the screen needs to be on all the time. Really love your work. Awesome effort. I appreciate it. Yeah, actually, Crossroads does have a podcast, and we're on most of the big podcasting platforms, including Spotify, iTunes. If you go in most of the videos we have, go into the description, you can find a link to our podcasts. Next up, we have Roger Beeman. It says, Joshua, foremost, this is kind of a long one, so I don't know if I'll do the whole thing, but let's see. Roger Beeman, Joshua, foremost, I'd like to say great work, man. It's comforting to find someone shining a light on and broadcasting on the CCP's decades of criminal and parasitic activity at the expense of the American people. Due to a multitude of reasons, mainstream media has stopped far short on in-depth reporting and calling the CCP out on the perpetuating bull. I have to agree with that. I appreciate it as well. With that commented, I would like to take your insight on the cybersecurity breach and data theft of the office personnel management approximately 6 years ago. The breach, along with the gross and negligent failure of the OPM to encrypt its data, consequently exposing the personal information of seemingly any and everyone affiliated with our national security. In your opinion, how devastating was this? Sorry, I'll get through this and I'll get to it. How devastating was this event to our national security, and what, if any, mitigating actions our government has done to punish the CCP and safeguard the potential leveraging, bribery, honeypotting, etc., of classified information from both private defense contractor employees, U.S. intelligence retirees, etc., and military, DARPA, U.S. Air Force, etc. members? Yeah, so you all might remember the OPM breach. Recently, the Trump administration actually pressed charges against the hackers who were involved with that. OPM is the Office of Personnel Management. They do what are we seeing here, right? I guess it's going to become my unintentional catchphrase. OPM is the Office of Personnel Management. Basically, if you apply for like security clearances, they do these really uncomfortable security clearances where you have to do lie detector tests, and they ask you pretty much every question you could possibly imagine. I know guys who've done it. They say it's extremely uncomfortable. Like you have to even sit on sensors. They put sensors all over your body. You have to sit on them. They ask you every question under the sun. And, if really uncomfortable questions, ask you everything. Any dirty secret you have is coming out in that, session pretty much. meaning that the Office of Personnel Management in its security clearances has admissions from you on everything you've ever done that nobody wants to hear about. They have every bit of dirt on you could ever imagine if you've done these. And so that means when the Chinese Communist Party went and did that, when they went and stole the OPM data, they got those security clearance data. They got that security clearance information on pretty much every person with security clearance in the U.S. Government employees, military, you name it. Meaning they can do all kinds of stuff. They can go and they can blackmail you. They can go and find out what you're interested in. They can go and find out what your weaknesses are morally, so they can target you. And exploit you. Now, when it comes to how the Chinese Communist Party, let me get into a few branches of this. When it gets into how the Chinese Communist Party runs its spy operations, normally when you're talking about espionage in the West, we would say motivation for engaging in espionage would be MICE, the acronym MICE: money, ideology, coercion, ego. These are the main reasons a person might become a spy, right? They want to get paid. They believe in some kind of issue, and for example, maybe they're part of a rebel cause and they want to expose the main organization. It could be ego, like they like the image of being a spy, or it could be coercion. They were forced into it by someone. For the Chinese Communist Party, when they talk about motivations for espionage, they talk about moral weaknesses and how do you exploit moral weaknesses. For the Chinese Communist Party, those are power, in other words, helping you gain political power or business power. It is lust, honey traps, pretty girls, young girls, that kind of stuff. It's money, getting rich, and it's fame. In other words, when they invite these professors over to China, roll out the red carpet for them, and so on. One big thing we could talk about actually is everyone's talking about vote fraud and things like this. There's been a lot of information on this that groups sometimes do bus around people. Sorry, just seeing some questions. People do sometimes bus around people. I've encountered it personally when covering some of the United Front groups in New York. And this is not Democrat, Republican. New York, most of the candidates are all Democrat anyways. This is different factions. When the Chinese Communist Party wants to back someone, it means that the Tongs back you. We're talking about in the US. The Tongs back you. If the Tongs back you, the Tongs have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of members. And so when they start backing you, that means they can get tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of votes if they claim to use the whole breadth of their operations. They also control a lot of the senior homes, meaning they can take the seniors, bus them around, and so on. I've encountered this personally. And there have been admissions of pretty prominent people coming out and talking about this in New York as well. Actually, Project Veritas had one of them on camera. And so when the CCP tries to coerce someone, it's through these things. There's also blackmail. Oftentimes that's done through honey traps, where, again, you might wake up drunk, hungover in a hotel room, cameras recorded the whole thing, and there's an underage girl sleeping next to you. That happens frequently in China. That's very common method of espionage. Oh, well, Maj Brit, appreciate the donation. Thank you. So getting into OPM breach, the CCP could use that, right? Because what you provided them with through your admissions that they took, these security clearances, where you've talked about every moral weakness you have, they can say, what are this person's weaknesses? What are their moral weaknesses? And they will exploit you based on that. This also ties into, ironically, that does tie into some traditional methods of Chinese espionage, such as, for example, the Chinese Book of Rhetoric or Book of Lobbying, which would be the Master of Ghost Valley. I can't remember the English translation of the name. You can find that in this book right here. Thunder in the Sky, Master of Ghost Valley would be the Chinese Book of Rhetoric or the Chinese Book of Lobbying. It's based on the I Ching, the Chinese system of divination, but that's tied to the Bagua theory, which is, you ever see the yin yang symbol and they have the lines, 3 lines on different sides of it? That's the I'm probably saying it wrong. That's the Bagua. And essentially it's part of the theory of how changes in the human world correlate with changes in the cosmic system, including down to changes within your own body and so on. Shailin and Sweet, thank you for the donation. And so they can apply this same system of theory. It's basically observing patterns of changes and understanding the trajectory of changes, and understanding things based on the 5 elements, meaning fire, earth, water, metal, wood, I think, and understanding the different elements of yin and yang, right? Yin yang, the taiji, it has the two, one has the other type thing. So again, part of the Chinese theory of how the universe works applied to the human body and applied to interactions. Again, that book I just mentioned, and tying into Chinese rhetoric, these things correlate, because they believe that when there's an opening, when something opens, something closes. When something closes, something opens. If you have a strength, your strength also has weakness. For example, how did the strongest men in history fall? Right? How did Samson fall? Remember in the Bible, the guy with the long hair, right? They cut his hair. The strongest men in history were taken down by women, by the beauty of women. They were not taken down by strength. They were taken down by gentleness. You can look at Samson, story of Samson. You can look in Chinese history, for example, Romance of the Three Kingdoms, Lu Bu, who was the greatest warrior of that time. Greatest warrior of the time, had the greatest weapon of the time, had the greatest horse of the time, what was it, red hair. Nobody could defeat him. He was like a one-man army. He was taken down by a beautiful girl. And so that's again, that theory of rhetoric, that theory of lobbying applied again to strategy. The Chinese system of espionage uses that same system, but in a more devious way, a more aggressive and morally devoid way, maybe is a way to put it. All right, folks. And then again, back to the OPM breach. Trump actually indicted, or charged the hackers who were involved in that. Interestingly, those hackers were 54 Research Institute. Now, you might remember that during the Obama administration, they indicted 4 or 5 Chinese hackers as well, who, for being involved in many different cyber attacks on the U.S., stealing intellectual property. Those hackers were with the General Staff Department, 3rd Department. They were Unit 61398. At the time, now they've reorganized their military. A lot of that has now been put under the Strategic Support Force, they call it. The General Staff Department, 3rd Department, would be the Signals Intelligence Agency, kind of like their NSA. Next to it would be the 2nd Department, which is like the Human Intelligence Department, traditional spies. And the 4th Department, the Electronics Intelligence Unit, ELINT, meaning breaching satellites, that kind of stuff. The individuals who were indicted by Trump for the OPM breach, that was 54 Research Institute, they were with the 4th Department, which means something interesting. These attacks were not meant for intellectual property theft. These attacks were not for profit. They had credit card information, they had all these things. They didn't use it for that. And so the question is, what did they use that data for? No, I'm sorry, that was Equifax. I'm getting my breaches confused. That was the Equifax breach, which was personal data on people like you and me, banking data, credit data. But that was related to the OPM breach. That was the Equifax breach, 54 Research Institute, the individuals indicted by Trump. But again, these interrelate. Oh, wow. Mike Williams, appreciate it. Also, I saw a few donations come in as well. I really appreciate it. Mario Villikis, appreciate it. Thank you. I actually did an exclusive story. Must have been 2015, 2016. And I actually interviewed an individual who was involved in a program in China to build a database, not just on Chinese, but also on Americans, also on people outside China, Canadians, Australians, and so on. It was an extension, they said. You can still find the storyline. It was called China Has You on File, or You're on File, China's Secret Database on Americans, I believe was the title of it. We broke the story on it. That was actually more recently revealed. That basically the Chinese Communist Party was stealing data like this. Personal information, OPM breach, Equifax breach, many others, stealing personal information on Americans, people in other countries. You might have seen the recent article coming out saying they've done similar breaches to people in Australia and in Canada. What are they doing with this data? Well, they're building databases on you. The same kind of system they have in China under the social credit system, where they monitor everything about you. They have profiles on you. They look at who you're friends with, who you're connected to, what's your online activity. The recent data on the breaches in Canada and in Australia also showed they were using public information. What are you posting on Twitter? What are you posting on Facebook? Creating databases, saving all that data, interrelating it. They're doing this. And basically, the reason for this is they're trying to export the social credit system. They do not want to keep this in China. When they go and they do these programs, building infrastructure with the One Belt, One Road initiative, they're building this system. They're exporting this system. And so the Chinese Communist Party, OPM, these things, this is what they're doing with it. Now, that said, let's move on to some of the next questions. Oh, wow, Steve Violence, appreciate it. Folks, you have to forgive me too for your background noise. New York is often quite loud. This is from the one and only Pinky. Joshua Philipp, aloha. Can you please address something? I've heard you say more than once that the CCP targets ABCs, that's American-born Chinese. Joshua said they target American-born Chinese specifically. Yes. So the United Front Work Department, I can explain how this works. First off, yes, they not only target American-born Chinese, they target Chinese immigrants, expats. They target American citizens who are Chinese. They target first generation, second generation, and third generation Chinese. They regard you as part of their system. That database, the system they have for that, I've actually done stories on it, analyzing their direct documents on this stuff. They don't hide it. They actually have public reporting on it. They regard second and third generation Chinese as part of their system, and they will target you the same exact ways they would target Chinese immigrants or Chinese nationals. Of course, they can't do as much against you because, it's a scandal, right? If they were to take American system, but they'll target you. They'll target you for espionage. That system is run through the Overseas Chinese Affairs Office, the OCAO. OCAO is a branch tied directly, some would say almost the same branch technically, of the United Front Work Department. Both of them operate through the consulates. Both of them target the influential members of society, the elite of each society. And yeah, they have all kinds of programs trying to bring people into China, trying to exploit them, and so on. And yes, they do target. They not only target you, but they have databases on you. They have public reporting on this. I've personally seen the documents on this and written about it. Let's move on. Let me get a drink. Got my kombucha again. That's nice. Very easy to make. Very nice to have. All right. So next up, we have Tyler Wilson. Were you guys silenced in any way during the Obama years? I never heard of y'all until this year, along with OANN, One American News Network. I don't think so. Funny enough, I think we just weren't as recognized during that time. Funny enough, during the Obama years, people said we were center left. We were considered a very centrist news outlet. We got labeled right wing and far right by the media because honestly, I think they see us as a competitor. There was actually a new analysis that just came out. I can't remember which one it was, but it's an independent source. They do analysis placing media on different on the political spectrum. Oh, John Tibbles, appreciate it. They place media on the political spectrum, and they're one of the bigger ones. You have to forgive me for not remember the name of them. But basically, what they do is they do blind tests where they have people go and read the content and place you. What they did was they initially placed Epoch Times as far right, and a lot of people challenged that, and so they agreed to go and do a full review. And they found very recently, a few weeks ago, they've rated Epoch Times now centrist to center right. And so, and center right, not because we, in the analysis, for example, they mentioned that actually we have very balanced sourcing, we have very balanced reporting. They say center right only because we tend to interview more, conservative types in terms of interviews, and that was the basis of saying center right as opposed to just absolute centrist. During the Obama years, I don't know what happened. I think we just weren't noticed as much. I think we were kind of seen more as human rights publication focused more on China. Fair enough, we didn't do as much U.S. reporting at that time. We kind of wanted to brand ourselves for a long time as the China experts, and so that was, the real branding content. Now, of course, we do investigative reporting on every country, including the U.S. You might have seen our reporting, for example, on Crossfire Hurricane, which I've been doing as well on the show. And actually, I helped with a lot of those investigations at Epoch Times as well. CFS, appreciate it. Thank you. So again, but again, Epoch Times is pretty new. The English edition, I think we're in 23 languages or something like that. I can't even keep up with it, to be honest, these days. English is, we're the largest independent Chinese news outlet, blacklisted in mainland China, but in most Chinatowns, also in Taiwan and Hong Kong. Our Chinese staff get threatened all the time by the Chinese Communist Party. English edition being the second largest, and that's what I work for, of course. And they do translate my content to a few other languages as well. Return of the Mac, appreciate it, thank you. I'll get more to questions too. And so again, you probably didn't hear about us at the time because we were still kind of coming up. Really, English Epoch Times only started like 2005. I've been with the paper since 2006. So I'm one of the older staff there, technically. And so it's just been an uphill battle. You're independent media trying to become not just a U.S. media but international media, and you're up against tech industry, which does everything they can to censor you. We've been censored repeatedly by Google, by Facebook, and so on. We have the Chinese Communist Party literally calling our advertisers and pushing them to cancel advertisements. We've had advertisers tell us this. Kane Ra, thank you, appreciate it. We've had advertisers tell us this. Pressure directly from the Chinese Communist Party. We've had cases, for example, where they were stealing our newspapers from the boxes, dumping stuff on, filthy stuff on them in the boxes, taking them, cutting them in half, putting them back. We've dealt with a lot of pressure and a lot of really ridiculous things that really, I don't know why the U.S. government hasn't done more about it, but we've faced incredible pressure. But despite that, we've, I think come up pretty well, and we're still moving, we're still advancing quickly. So, stay tuned on that. All right, next up. So Samuel STWHK. What do you think are the chances of the U.S. and China going to war? I think the Chinese Communist Party would do it in a heartbeat if they believed they could. In terms of hot war, in terms of troop-on-troop combat, or in terms of what most of us would consider war. But an important thing to note, war is not just conventional warfare. War is also unconventional warfare. And there's also a spectrum of warfare. Oh, sorry, just hear your questions. War is also a spectrum of warfare. You're asking what are the chances of the U.S. and China going to war? We're already at war with them. In their own words, in their own definition of war, we are already at war with them. It's just that the United States has not been fighting back. Very little, at least. One sec. The Chinese Communist Party has been waging war against the United States since the Cold War. Since the Korean War, at least. And so, it's psychological warfare. It's media warfare, taking over our news outlets, taking over, kombucha, come on. Drink my homemade kombucha, come on. The psychological warfare, media warfare, taking over outlets of news and information, subverting outlets of news and information, subverting think tanks. It's ideological subversion. How do you wither away the foundations of a society? What are the foundations of a society? General faith in terms of the institutions. Do you believe your government functions? Does your government function? Well, they will infiltrate it. They will subvert it. They will make it corrupt. They will make it not serve the function it used to. Peter Barrett, I appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah, I'm a double agent. I'd be a very bad double agent. Let's put it that way. They subvert the institutions and make them serve the opposite function of what they're meant to. You might have read, many of you may have seen the video of Yuri Bezmenov. He was a Soviet defector. He did a few viral videos at the time during the Cold War that weren't viral at the time, but have gone viral on YouTube since. He's very good. I highly recommend watching his videos. But he also wrote a book called Love Letter to America. It's hard to find a physical copy, but you can find ebook versions of it. They're very good. Yeah, thank you, Kane. I appreciate it. You can find digital copies of it online. Again, it's Yuri Bezmenov. He writes under his pseudonym, which is Thomas Schumann. It's very good. And it outlines the methods of ideological subversion. And ideological subversion also is what the Chinese Communist Party is carrying out. And what is that? How do you conquer a society? Using means that basically is a slow boil technique, where you gradually take it over from the inside, where you gradually wear down their institutions, you decay their society, you decay the foundations of the society. And once you've decayed them fully enough, once you've decayed them to such an extent, you go in, you roll in, and you reestablish order. And that order is this process of conquering, essentially. So it's based on the ideas of demoralizing a society, making people lose hope, turning people against each other, making people hate each other. What is a society, right? Now, unless we go back to tribalism, where you have people of ethnic backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, and religious backgrounds, so on, racial backgrounds, living separately from each other, totally separately. That would be a tribalist society. To build a larger country like the United States, like the Roman Empire, you need to have many different cultures, many different beliefs, many different cultural backgrounds, traditions, so on, having some kind of unifying idea that allows them to establish a country. That could be something as simple as recognizing the ruler, like when Genghis Khan was going around and conquering. It could be something as simple as, for example, paying homage to a larger ruler, right? And it could be something as advanced as the constitutional republics that have existed throughout history, whether the Roman Empire or parts of the Greek Empire. We did have many different islands, each of which had a very different culture. Now, if you wanted to destroy a society, what's the easiest way to do it? You find a way to destroy the unifying elements of the different pockets within that society. You make the races hate each other. You make the cultures hate each other. You make the different religions hate each other. You turn them against each other. You destroy the elements of social harmony. You destroy the unifying ideas of that society. And so when the Soviets were waging war against the US, demoralization was part of that process. And then targeting as well the institutions that make the country function. If you can destroy these institutions, if not make them serve an opposite function, make the police serve the opposite function, make the government serve the opposite function, invert the systems of justice so that justice serves its opposite function, where good people are punished and evil people are the ones who are rewarded and protected, right? Make it serve the opposite function. Infiltrate the entertainment industry, infiltrate the, systems of, pastimes, get into the churches, like the Liberation Theology School, like the Soviet infiltration of the World Council of the Churches, and try to influence them from there. Destroy the institutions that would help, that would oppose you. That is the process. So again, demoralization, destabilization, conflict, open conflict, where you reach a state of civil war, and then normalization, where finally you reestablish social order. You take the people who thought, were serving your side the whole time, they execute them. And because you don't need revolutionaries anymore. You need stability under a new totalitarian system. That is how these groups take over. And so the Chinese Communist Party is doing the same thing. The United Front Work Department, their systems of unconventional warfare, unrestricted warfare, this is what it is. Let's see here. CFS, I appreciate it. Yeah. You might have seen, so you're saying off topic, but yes, I am a Catholic and feeling sad and confused about the Vatican, even considering extending deal with the CCP. You can watch the interview I did with James Bascom, I believe on Friday, where we talked about the Vatican's deal with the CCP. Now, the Vatican, keep in mind, the current Pope, Pope Francis, he's a liberation theologist school Catholic. Keep in mind that under Vatican I as opposed to Vatican II. If you're Vatican I, if you were communist, you'd be excommunicated. There was a Catholic branch that broke off from them because of that, because they believed that basically that break within the Catholic Church where they brought in communist socialist ideas, that was a violation of the basic law of the Vatican. They believed it had been subverted. And so liberation theology, these new schools, they're not recognized as being legitimate. The Vatican I folks don't recognize the current Vatican. And what Pope Francis is doing right now is an extension of that. The individual I interviewed on Friday, James Bascom, is part of an organization of Vatican I Catholics. And, he's humble. I get along well with the guy. He's humble. He's a nice guy. Basically, they hold themselves to the standards of priests, but because they're not recognized by the Vatican, they don't have that title, essentially. And so anyways, I'm aware of the issue with the Catholic Church and of, some of the movements to subvert the Christian churches. They do it to every religion. They did it to Islam. Going back to the early 1900s, they had the Muslim, part of what the Muslim Brotherhood was. They had a socialist in Egypt, part of the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood, rewrite, basically make new interpretations of Islam, and think of it what you want, of course. But what they did was they reinterpreted Islam through the lens of socialism, and they created a new system called Islamism. Now, what it did was it merged the idea of socialism with Sharia law. The book was a guy named I can't remember his name, Qutb. It was like something like in the footsteps of Islam or something like that. Basically, what they did though is they merged the ideas of Islam with socialism. And that started a lot of the Liberation Front movements. That started a lot of the terrorist movements. In fact, remember that the Muslim Brotherhood, the Taliban was an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. A lot of the organizations that were launching terrorist attacks during the Cold War were Soviet front operations. The Soviet Union was backing a lot of them. The different liberation fronts, Palestinian Liberation Front, and so on. A lot of these things were socialist movements. Islamism, the establishment of these theocratic totalitarian systems using socialist principles, that was the reinterpretation of these things in accordance with socialism. Same thing happened to Buddhism, the China Buddha Association. Same thing happened to Taoism. Same thing happened to Christianity. Same thing happened to Catholicism. Now, these different socialist movements, communist movements, they work to influence, infiltrate and alter the religions. Chinese Communist Party is doing it heavily. If you watch my show, you've seen a lot of cases where we talked about this. They're aggressively doing this. Because again, it's the people who can recognize good from evil, right? The people who have a traditional standard of measuring morality, who can look at a government and say, what you're doing is unethical. What you're doing is morally wrong. If you don't have that basis, whatever it may be, if you don't have that basis of a moral standard through which you can judge right from wrong, then what happens? Your entire basis of right and wrong is whatever the government says is right and wrong. And that's what political correctness is. Direct origin of the word. Political correctness, 1967, Mao Zedong. The idea was basically whatever the government does is what's moral. Whatever they do is what's moral. They are the baseline of morality. If they say, killing your landlord is moral one day, that is moral. Because they set the basis of morality. They set the basis of law. If you have a religion, if you have a traditional belief, you can recognize what they're doing is immoral. And this is why they try to destroy religion. This is why they try to destroy every religion. You name it. They try to destroy all of them. Sorry, folks. A lot of donations coming in. I appreciate it. Peter Barrett, I appreciate it. Let me get to some of the older questions first, and I'll get to some of the new ones, because otherwise I'm terrible with keeping up with everything. Palak Jain, Pakistan as well. Let me get through some of the previous questions, and I'll try and get to these too. Sorry, I tend to get distracted. You have to forgive me. All right, one sec. All right, from John Tibbles. I appreciate the donation. Thank you. Is the Democrat stimulus bill to bail out states going to pay U.S. dollars to China to help them continue the Belt and Road? Does China own our news media and the Democrats? I'd say it's complicated. Now, will the Democrats give stimulus money to China to help with their Belt and Road? I haven't personally seen signs that they would do that. At the same time, who knows? Keep in mind, as we mentioned in the previous episode, that Biden was assigned by Obama during the Asia pivot to go and negotiate with China. During those negotiations, Hunter Biden made a lot of money with China. Joe Biden brought Hunter Biden along with him on those trips. Hunter Biden left with a lot of money. Technically, the Obama administration claimed that China was a threat during that time. That was the nature of the Asia pivot. And so, who was the one in charge? If you were to ask me, I'd say that there are many different factions within the Democratic Party right now. They're not a single party, and each of them has a very different motivation. I mentioned before this book, The Shadow Party by David Horowitz, talking about how, this was before any of this was controversial, but how George Soros bought control of the Democratic Party. That was, I believe, post-Bush, pre-Obama, I want to say, but I'd have to check that because I haven't read that book in a while. And so you do have the Soros faction within the Democratic Party, right? That is the global. I'll get into some other branches. That's kind of the globalist branch, open borders and so on. The classical Democrats, the Obama types. They have their own ambitions with China. They would oppose, I think, the Chinese Communist Party in many regards. There are other banking groups, some of the other big banking families they do have pretty deep deals with the CCP. It does seem that the Soros system, the open borders folks, they do seem to be opposed to the Chinese Communist Party to an extent. But, it's always mixed. I can't say what their agenda is, but there's interest in destabilizing countries, because once you destabilize a country, you can reestablish order under whatever you interpret it as. It does seem that the Soros folks do mostly oppose the CCP, but it's hard to tell, to be honest. So you have that faction within the Democrats. You might remember that I think it was Donna Brazile in her book during the elections or following the elections. She talked about how Hillary Clinton bought control of the Democratic Party, basically bailed it out after Obama. That was Donna Brazile's book, I believe. You might remember the reporting on that. It was in the pre-release copies of it. I believe she removed the section on that before the book was officially published because it got so much bad press. Now, so in other words, you had Soros bail out the Democratic Party, then you had the Clinton family bail out the Democratic Party. Hard to say what their factional interests are. It's hard to say, to be honest. I would say they're more classical Democrat system as well, but I don't know. They have their own way of doing things. And then the third faction you have would be the Democratic Socialists of America, the DSA. That does tie in with the Soros faction a bit. But basically, they've taken over the grassroots of the Democratic Party. A lot of the nonprofits, the activist organizations, the Acorn types. Some would say, you might remember some of the reporting of Obama being tied to the Acorn folks. These are the more radical elements of them. And these control the grassroots. They control the unions. They control a lot of the votes. And so these are really the three different factions you have pulling different strings within the Democrats. I think right now what you have is the Democrats not wanting to admit that there are really three different parties right now. You have the Soros faction, the Clinton faction, and you have the Democratic Socialists of America faction. And then maybe some holdovers who are more like classical Democrats who don't want to be part of any of these, but see it getting pulled in all these different directions, and they believe that if you don't maintain cohesion, the whole thing is going to fall to pieces. I think we saw the same thing happen, ironically, with the conservatives, right? Because you might remember at the beginning of it, you had a few different factions as well. You had the Bush faction, you had the guys who were just interested in making basically business deals at all costs, including with China, and then you had the you had the Trump faction, basically. And it did seem the Trump faction won out because Bush is now backing, he's with the Democrats now, ironically. The Bush faction is now with the Democrats. If you look at the Never Trumpers, the rhinos, they're with the Democrats as well. And so these folks have gone over with the Democrats now. They're no longer aligned with the Republican Party, which could mean a few different things when you think about the upcoming elections. What does that mean? In terms of elections. Personally, I don't think the average Republican voter went along with them, although I do know some Republican voters who are more like absolute free trade types who would oppose, for example, Trump's trade policies and stuff. Although personally, I think that they were necessary, especially in dealing with China. I don't think anything else was working. But, think what you'd like on that, of course. Now, back to the question, with that background, at least in my analysis, would the Democrats support China? I don't think they would, to be honest. But again, who knows? Because there are different factions in it, and they don't have the best track record with it. The other part of that is, does China own our news media and the Democrats? The Chinese Communist Party tries to subvert all politicians, right and left. They don't differentiate. They're just as likely to have different people approaching Republicans as they are the Democrats. They'll just use different narratives when doing it. If they want to approach the conservatives, they'll do it under the name of business. They'll do it under the name of, maybe it'll even be double agents trying to promote people selling this idea of, how do you challenge the CCP? They do this kind of stuff. More likely it's going to be some kind of business engagement type stuff. That'd be the more likely path. And you do have people making business ties with China, getting business deals for them or their family members, engaging in research programs, you name it. So that does happen. Democrats, they use the same tools as well, but they also have race politics mixed into it as well. And so it's complicated. They do the same thing both sides of the aisle. And yes, they do have large-scale programs to compromise our media. Let me try to get to this. So when it comes to subverting media, they have a few different ways of doing it. You might remember some of the different reporting, including that I've talked about, of China Watch under China Daily, which is now registered as a foreign mission of the Chinese Communist Party. It was a foreign agent before. Now it's a foreign mission. Foreign agent means you're representing the interests of a foreign government. Foreign mission means you're basically a branch of that government. You're a diplomatic branch of that government, basically. And so these news outlets accepting money from China Watch, publishing these China Watch inserts, means basically they're taking money directly from the Chinese government under current U.S. definitions. There are quite a few that still take it. In addition, now a lot of attention has fallen on that, but they have other programs for it as well, such as they have training programs in China once a year. Now, for the Chinese media, they have an annual training program under the State Council where they basically get all the media to go to different parts of China, and they educate journalists on all their different narratives. Under the State Council is Xinhua, one of the largest state-run Chinese news outlets under the CCP. And Xinhua also holds the same type of program, the exact same type of training program they use for their own state-run media for Western journalists. Then they invite all these Western journalists to China under the same thing. Last time they had it, I saw many of the large-scale mainstream news outlets being partners with that. And so they are deeply engaged with China. Now, they would probably deny it, saying, oh, well, we have reporters in China. What are you going to say about it? The Epoch Times is blacklisted in China for a reason, which is we don't fold. We don't fold. We refuse to censor ourselves. If you're still in China, you're censoring yourself. You're playing their game. If you don't, they're going to arrest you. They're going to blackmail you. That's what happened to our reporters, because we don't play their games. Yeah, and there's other ways too. You got to think of what are the sources of information for journalists: think tanks, academics. How many academics have been subverted by the CCP? How many businesses have major deals with the CCP, and in their own lobbying efforts, they're lobbying on behalf of those interests? The number of intertwining interests is very complex, and it's kind of everywhere. And so it's hard sometimes to accuse them of being directly controlled by them, as opposed to willfully influenced or unwittingly influenced. But they have large scale programs for all these things. Let's keep moving on. I always feel bad I can never get to all your questions. All right, 1 second. Let me get some more drink. All right. Peter Barrett, appreciate the donation. Josh, how would you compare 1930s sympathy towards Nazi Germany to current time sympathy towards the CCP? I'd say it's very similar, actually. Interesting book about this history would be Russia Under the Bolshevik Regime. Richard Pipes. He unfortunately recently died. Fantastic book. Talks not just about the Soviets and the socialists, but also the National Socialists, meaning the Nazis. and also the the fascists, who were also they were a type of socialism. It was recognized as such. Of course, different interpretation of socialism, but socialism all the same. Fantastic book. And so if we talk about the support of the U.S. for Nazi Germany, look, the unfortunate reality is a lot of individuals really supported the Nazis because it was seen as kind of a functioning system of socialism. What were the other socialist systems at that time? Well, you had, the Bolsheviks in Russia, who were, this agrarian kind of backwoods looking society that really went against Marx's theories of how the revolution would start. Marx believed that in the stages of civilization, meaning, the agrarian society or primitive communism, the agrarian society, capitalism, socialism, communism. And so he believed that you would have to have a transition from capitalism to socialism. He believed that the natural development of the factories and the Industrial Revolution would lead to socialism. And so when Lenin came about and launched his Bolshevik revolution from an agrarian society, really, going against everything Marx believed, and also using violent revolution to achieve it, as opposed to a natural transition. That a lot of the socialists at the time were like, this isn't real socialism, ironically. This isn't real communism because it was a violent revolution. It was from an agrarian society. This isn't socialism. People believed that socialism would emerge from the advanced capitalist societies, which at that time were Germany, the UK. And so there was a big fight in Germany over which interpretation of socialism would dominate. There was fascism, modeled after Mussolini's fascism, who did his March on Rome. It was nonviolent revolution for the most part, at least in the early stages, and wasn't really able to fully enact his socialist system until he got control of Salo, because he was still under the Pope. He still had to answer to the systems there. He wasn't fully in charge of the country. Not until Hitler gave him control of Salo. Hitler latched onto the ideas of Aryanism, which was already existing popular concept in Germany at that time. It was an occult concept, Aryanism. He latched onto that as a popular concept to do that. And basically, with the Nazis and fascists, they observed something, which was that during the First World War, when Marx came out and said, "Workers of the world unite," the workers of the world did not unite. They stood behind their respective kings. And that sent a very simple message. Now, a lot of the socialists were disenfranchised by that. They were like, oh, what the heck? We thought this was going to be our revolution. The workers of the world didn't unite. They fought for their countries. Mussolini and Hitler observed that, and they said, oh, well, that must mean that nationalism is a more powerful tool than internationalism. And so they created systems of socialism based on that concept. A lot of people in the US, unfortunately, like Henry Ford, viewed that as a functioning system of socialism because it was based on the factory system. He said, this is how the factory system works, this organizing of society, this organizing of economy. And based on that, they believed it would work. Great history on this as well. Socialism by Ludwig von Mises. I often recommend it. I don't know where it is. Socialism, Ludwig von Mises. Highly recommended. If you don't have time to read the whole version of it, there's a great audio book version on YouTube. And it's by a guy who does a Stoicism channel. But the chapter is called Planned Chaos. If you go on YouTube after this broadcast, go in YouTube, type in Planned Chaos Mises, and you'll find about a 3-hour-long podcast or audiobook recording of a chapter from that is fantastic. And it talks about the history of the Nazis as being tied to the socialist movement and as how these different systems were organized. It's very good. So back to that question. Josh, how would you compare 1930s American sympathy toward Nazi Germany to current time sympathy towards the CCP? It's exactly the same. Really, we're watching history repeat itself. Cindy Moore, appreciate it. Thank you. We're watching history repeat itself. Same thing happened during the Soviet Union. A lot of the big bankers, a lot of the financial institutions were playing both sides of every conflict. Going far back, the banking institutions, the state bank systems, they were playing both sides of all these different conflicts. And, really, Soviet Union, they were backing them the same. China's Communist Party, they're backing them all the same.
even right now, at a time, ironically, when people are witnessing all these human rights abuses in China, when there's all this controversy about China, the financial institutions in the U.S. are pouring money into China. It is happening as we speak. It's the same exact thing we saw happen before. It's history repeating itself. And really, as far as I'm concerned, these people have blood on their hands. They're committing the same types of crime. Really, what constituted a Nazi war criminal? How many people did Hitler kill? How many people did Mao Zedong kill? Right? Mao killed more. You're looking at 40 million Hitler, if different estimates, of course, 50 million to 70 million to Mao Zedong, and counting under the Chinese Communist Party as we speak. I think China, if and when, I believe when, and hopefully very soon, the Chinese Communist Party falls, in order to move beyond it, in order to make sure that the same people do not maintain power within it, like happened with the Soviets, where after the fall of the Soviet Union, the people with money were the former Communist Party members, and they just bought up all the resources because they were the ones who had the money. To make sure that doesn't happen to China, we need to have a Nuremberg type trial, I believe. And frankly, I hope that the people who are pouring money into the system are, they face justice just the same. Cindy Moore, appreciate it. And Paul C. Robertson, thank you as well. Fermented foods. How old is my tea fungi culture? I've been making kombucha now for about a year. My dad got me into it, actually. I like it personally. But again, I don't know. Who knows if it does anything? I think it's quite good. Bit of an off topic. Oh wow, Ram Salient, I appreciate the donation. All right, Joe B, I appreciate the donation also. Thank you. Any thought on the increased number of foreign firings on Chinese fishing ships after they failed to leave the area after caught illegally fishing? I think a lot of when it comes now, what makes it immoral to fire at and sink a Chinese ship, right? The United Nations. It's the different international agreements that the U.S. and mostly Western countries have. This is a brittle system. This is a system of peace recognized mostly just enforced by the United States, and possibly to a degree by fear from the Chinese Communist Party. You have a lot of countries that don't really follow these systems, and so them firing on the CCP is not that far-fetched. Oh, Sonia Amato, appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah, them firing on the CCP and sinking their ships, they're going to look at two things. One, will the United States punish us in the world court? Pretty much. Two, will China launch counterattacks? Probably not. And so what is the consequence if they don't do so? Well, the Chinese Communist Party is going to steamroll them. CCP is going to steamroll them and do everything they can to take everything they have. And so I really think what we're seeing is countries like Vietnam, even ironically North Korea, not being afraid of standing up against the CCP right now. Although it does seem right now that Xi Jinping is cozying up with North Korea. I'm sorry, with Kim Jongun, which is interesting. North Korea used to be more of a Jiang faction aligned. Jiang's been the former leader. They really didn't like the Xi faction, especially after the death of Kim Jong-il. I'm sorry, the father of Kim Jong-un. Basically, there was a destabilization. The Xi faction was trying to rebuild ties. You might remember they murdered. He allegedly murdered. Kim Jong-un allegedly murdered his uncle. Reports said he fed him to dogs. That was the rumor. How do you confirm it? Of course, horrifying stuff. But what was the context of that? Well, basically, the Xi faction was trying to build ties there. There was concerns among the Kim Jong-un faction within North Korea that there were individuals trying to basically unseat him and to align with Xi as opposed to the Jiang faction. There was a lot of different types of infighting, and the details on it are thin. But from our sources, we can paint some of it a picture, and it does seem that they're leaning now towards the Xi faction, and so hard to see how things going forward. But yeah, in the past, North Korea, even Russia's fired on Chinese ships, and China's like, they don't want to cause trouble, so they're like, oh, nothing to see here, folks. This is just Russia enforcing its territorial claims or something. Oh, wow, it's getting late. 11:25. All right, let's move on to a couple others, and we'll call it a night. Palak Jain. Josh, can you talk about Pakistan helping CCP? The Chinese Communist Party has subverted several different countries in that region. Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Nepal, for example. Go back a bit further. There are different factions even during the Soviets. The Soviet Union mostly controlled Iran. Saudi Arabia was more U.S. leaning, although it was complicated. A lot of people don't understand the history of Saudi Arabia and these different countries. Now, some of you may have heard, for example, rumors about the Saudis being involved with, the Bush administration, like, what was his name? Bendir Obama or Bendir Bush. He was part of Bendir bin Laden, right? The Bush ties to the bin Laden family. You might have heard, for example, about the individual. What was his name? I can't remember his name now. The individual who allegedly paid for Obama to go to school. Which was said on record by an African American activist guy talking. He later denied it, but he did say it on record. Alawad bin Salam. I can't remember his name now. Sorry, let me get back to my point. There are different individuals within Saudi Arabia who there's different factions there, basically. Now, during the time of the Cold War, Iran was leaning towards the Soviets. They were trying to subvert Saudi Arabia as well. And there was a faction that was looking basically towards what they called the Egyptian model of Islam, meaning Islam with socialism intertwined with it. You might remember earlier in this episode where I was talking about how, all the religions pretty much there's branches that have been subverted by socialism, basically. Liberation theology, World Council of Churches, China Buddha Association, and then Islamism for most of the Islamic world. A lot of that's based on the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, has been running a lot of that system, which Al-Qaeda was an offshoot of. When you get into what happened in Saudi Arabia, the king of Saudi Arabia was mostly U.S. aligned, but there were factions within it who were trying to alter that system and lean toward what they call a Egyptian model of socialism, Egyptian model of Islam. Now, that started what they called the Prince Revolution. There was an individual they called the Red Prince, and the Red Prince was the father of Alawid bin Salam, I believe his name was, the individual allegedly who helped Obama get through college. He was basically charged in trying to launch a coup against the country. He was excommunicated for a while, later brought back in. And these individuals have basically had a very jealous bout with the current leaders of the Saudi government. When the current leader of the Saudi government had many of them arrested, including that individual whose name I keep forgetting, allegedly hanging him upside down by his feet. You should understand, of course, the history of this to understand what might have been going on there. I did a story on this, if you all want to read it, where I talk about the history of the Red Princes as related to Trump building these new ties with the Saudi Arabians, because the individuals the Saudi king was going against were part of that Red Prince faction. And so, anyways, I'm getting off topic, but back to the idea of Pakistan. There are different factions within the Islamic world who are not really Muslim, right? Which of these countries is condemning the human rights abuses in China right now against Muslims, right? Not Pakistan, not Iran. Why is that, right? You tell me. They're defending the Chinese Communist Party's persecution of Muslims. Why is that? If they really believe in all these different narratives they're pushing, why are they not condemning the Chinese Communist Party? It's because it's politics. It's Islamism. It's not traditional Islam. These are socialist governments. They're communist governments running under the banner of a theocratic system that they're using to subjugate nations. That was the nature of a lot of these Liberation Front organizations. If there's been stories on it, Pakistan, Iran, they're not condemning the CCP. Yeah, that's right. That's right. It was Prince Alawid bin Talal. Thank you. That was the one. Alawid bin Talal. Salam is the current prince. Alawid bin Talal, his father was the Red Prince. That was his name. Actually, the history of it's really fascinating. If you want to read it, look up Alawid bin Talal, Red Prince. You'll find some really great history books on it. But yeah, that was the guy who paid for Obama's college, according to one individual who Obama later denied it. But it does seem pretty dang credible, just to be honest. Anyways, I'm getting off topic, but that is why Pakistan's helping the CCP. There are different governments that they operate under the banner of religion and so on, but they're just people looking for power. A lot of them have been deeply subverted by these different things. And again, Saudi Arabia represents a very different interpretation of Islam than, for example, Iran. Not just in terms of the traditional interpretations, but in terms of the socialist elements of it. These things aren't black and white. You know what I mean? Anyways, folks, it's 11:32. I would love talking with you all night, and I have a long list of questions I was hoping to get to, but I tend to go on my tangents. I hope you all enjoy it. All right. Anyways, yeah, someone's asking about Alawid bin Talal owning part of the Hotel Las Vegas massacre shootout. Yeah, that I've read that. I did see credible information on that. This stuff's complicated. Well, folks, again, I would love to talk with you all night. To be honest, I really enjoy doing the Q&As. I probably enjoy it more than the normal news broadcasts. But, of course, we're broadcasting on TV now, so I have to look more prim and proper. So, this format doesn't work for TV, unfortunately. Anyways, there's a lot of questions that I can get to, and I would love to get to all of them. But, you have to forgive me just because of the time limits. I really you folks are great. I love doing the Q&As, love hanging out with y'all. Yeah, Christina Padilla, I appreciate it. Thank you. I could talk all night, but I have to go to the office tomorrow, get to do another episode. Anyways, folks, as always, please take care of yourselves, stay healthy, and as always, stay free. Thank you.